I want to welcome you back to, this is our Office Hours Live. And at your insistence, we're doing some interviews. I'm doing interviews with people who I really think are fabulous people, change agents, people who I consider to be really good friends. And my guest today is none other than the one and only Karin Martin.
Hello.
And let me tell you about Karin, because Karin, this is something you don't know. Karin is not only a specialist and an expert in criminal policy, crime policy, criminal justice, inequality, and the relationships between all of these, but had the privilege of being my student, my graduate student, and one of my best ever graduate students.
And teaching assistant.
And teaching assistant.
For many years.
For many years. And in fact, I resent the fact that Karin went on to actually do real work in the real world and is no longer my teaching assistant here, but that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me leave
well,
eventually. I appreciate that.
I let you leave on the promise that you'd come back and do this live office hours.
Debt paid.
Debt paid. So what we're going to do today is really talk about crime policy, and maybe, Karin, the best way of starting is just to ask you about what you're working on and what you're interested in and how crime and criminal justice policy kind of fits into inequality.
I am working on a lot of things all kind of under an umbrella of criminal justice debt. And what I mean by that is whenever people have contact with the criminal justice system, they usually incur some type of debt. So we have fines, fees, surcharges, restitution, court costs, a whole world of different types of monetary liabilities that people get just from contact with the criminal justice system. Some of these things happen before there's any adjudication of guilt, right? So just a jail booking fee, or you have to pay court costs to access the judge, or if you miss a deadline, then you get lots of fees on top of your basic fine.
So you mean you're talking about if I'm arrested for something?
Yes.
I'm charged. I'm not found guilty yet.
Right.
I'm just charged.
Right.
There's a suspicion that I did something. That I have to pay money?
Yes, you do. In many jails, it's called a jail booking fee, and they will literally take some cash out of your pockets and apply it towards whatever the jail booking fee is. Some places it's only $5 or $10, but in some places it's hundreds of dollars.
Just to be booked into jail?
To be booked. It's
I have to pay.
Yes.
I'm arrested.
Yes.
I say, I'm innocent. I didn't do it, but I have to pay to go to jail.
Yes.
That's wild.
That's a problem.
There
was one case where there was actually an arrest fee that got over. The district court decided that wasn't a good idea. So you would get arrested and have to pay $25.
Because you're arrested?
Yes.
Just to be arrested?
Yes. That's no longer exists, but it did exist at one point.
But this booking fee for jails,
yeah.
Is this pretty common across the country?
It's hard to tell. There's no national database. You can't just kind of Google this stuff and look it up, but there was a survey done a few years ago, and it's something like, I think like 30% maybe of the jails that responded to this survey said yes. But in my own research, I'm finding that it's all over the country. So it's not just the South, it's not just the Midwest, it's all over the country. One of the issues is that it is determined by the county, right? So it's not like the state decides, the county decides, the sheriff decides. So it's small entities, small jurisdictions can decide if they want to have a jail booking fee.
Well, I would say if you have a jurisdiction, a county, and the decision, do you have a jail booking fee or not? They say, okay, sure.
Right.
Why not?
Right, why not?
Extra revenue.
Yes, it seems like extra revenue, but the issue is that a lot of people can't pay, and so then the county is spending money trying to collect, and then that brings us to what I said my original topic is, which is criminal justice debt.
So I can't pay. Let's go back. I'm
okay.
Arrested, and I'm told I have to pay for going to jail.
Yes.
And I don't have the money. And you mean there's a separate action that can be taken against me for not paying the debt that I owe for not paying to go to jail? Yeah,
that idea, kind of debt upon fine upon surcharge upon fee, and a huge cycle is throughout the criminal justice system. So not just with jail booking fees, but if you have a traffic ticket, for example, and in California, if you miss the deadline, then you immediately get hundreds of dollars in extra surcharges and penalty assessments. Base fines that are $100 immediately become over $400. If you miss the deadline, that immediately becomes over $800. And this is across the country. So in New Jersey, they have some fees that, $1,000 or something, doing something bad, like driving under the influence of alcohol. But surcharges immediately make it $3,000.
So in other words, if I can't pay the charge,
right.
That is let's assume in this case, it's legitimate. Well, it's the fine for
Right.
you know
You did
doing
something
something.
bad.
I did
Yeah.
something bad. You know, I drove under the influence of alcohol or had an accident or something. Then if I can't pay that, then there's an escalator in terms of interest payments.
Actually, even if you can pay that, there's immediately an escalator. So the surcharges are automatic and instant. So as soon as you're assessed a fine, it immediately becomes an additional amount. And then if you can't pay, then there's extra fees and surcharges on top of that.
Wait. I want to get this straight because this is like Kafka.
Yes.
Okay, I'm arrested for being under the influence, and I'm fined $1,000.
Right.
And then immediately, I say, okay, I'll write you a check.
For $1,000.
And then you
that's
say,
nice. You paid a third of what you owe because you actually owe us $3,000.
But I thought that the fine was $1,000.
It was past tense.
But it became
Now it became
$3,000.
Yes. So in California, we have something called penalty assessments. For every $10 in a fine, a base fine, the state assesses $29 in penalty assessments. So if you do quick math, you see if you have a $100 fine, you immediately add $290.
But that means it's not a $100 fine.
Correct.
So this is a fraud. I mean, it's not a fraud.
Well,
but the statute, the law, says $100, presumably, right?
The law says $100, but then the other laws say penalty assessments because the legislature across the country are looking for money. Jurisdictions are looking for money. So probation does it, parole does it, jails do it, police departments do it, county prisons do it. So everybody's looking for money. So legislatures across the country have decided that we'll have penalty assessment surcharges. And so it goes to fund very important things like crime victims assistance fees or DNA testing fees or helicopter evacuation fees. But in some places it's very unrelated to criminal justice topics such as wildlife and fish and game fees or nature preserve fees.
But Karen, even if it's related to criminal justice,
Yes.
I mean, it seems absurd that there's a fine there. I'm told the fine is for drunken driving $1,000 or for something else $100, and then immediately, I mean, without me doing anything, without any time passes, it escalates, just explodes into 3 times that amount, and then on top of that, if I'm put in jail, I've got to pay another amount of money just to go to jail.
And you may note when you're in jail you can't work, and so there's a problem with expecting people to pay while at the same time you're depriving them their ability to make a livelihood, and this is horrible in the realm of taking people's driver's licenses away when they can't pay fines and fees.
So I'm in jail. I owe now, let's say $3,000, triple what the fine originally was because it automatically, and I owe a jail fee for going into jail, and you've taken away my driver's license, and I'm in jail for a couple of days. Now I haven't been found to be guilty of anything yet.
Well, for some of those, it depends, right? For the booking fee, you haven't. A lot of times at the time a fine is assessed, you have been determined to have actually done the thing.
Okay.
So this is going back to this very complicated world. So, but for a good segment of these, you haven't been determined to be guilty. But for a lot of them, you have. But at the same time, that doesn't, I don't think, still make it okay to have many multiples the amount of the fine and surcharges.
Well, not only that, but if I have a debt, now I owe the county or the state some
Usually
big chunk
both.
of money.
Yep.
And what happens to that debt? I mean, do I then get more fines attached to that debt?
Usually, yes. You try to pay it. Some places allow you to have an installment plan. Some places don't. Some places put you in jail if you can't pay. A lot of places take away your driver's license if you can't pay.
But I've been in jail, and they took away my driver's license,
Right.
and I haven't. And you want me to? And I haven't been able to pay what I owe even to go to jail.
Correct.
And now you want me to pay more
Yes.
because I owe it. I have a debt, and I haven't paid.
Yes. See how that works?
This is getting curiouser.
It is. It's a big
Curious.
problem. And there's hundreds of millions, I would say billions of dollars in outstanding criminal justice debt in this country.
So what happens if I have this unbelievable debt that's kind of piling up, and there's more and more fines that accrue on that debt because I haven't paid the debt?
Right.
So I get into a deeper and deeper and deeper hole.
Yes.
Can I be then re-arrested
Absolutely.
for not paying my debt?
Yes. Usually, a lot of places have a statute so that if you fail to pay or fail to appear, fail to go to court, then there's a warrant out for your arrest. And so then a lot of people know they have a warrant. That's not an unpleasant place to be. So you can be arrested and brought back to court or taken to jail. And then, you know, the whole issue with Ferguson, one of the major components of what was happening, and this is in the Department of Justice report about Ferguson, is that that's precisely the situation. People were getting caught into this cycle of debt. They were being put in jail because they couldn't pay, often for extremely minor offenses, right? Riding your bike on the sidewalk. One person was just sitting in his car in a playground and got accused by a cop of, you know, one of the things he did was they said that he was lied to a law enforcement officer because it's something like he said his name was Mike when his name was really Michael. So they were just using any type of excuse they could to get people into this system where they had to pay lots of money.
So Mike, who should have said Michael,
right,
is in this cycle of debt.
Yes.
That is, he has a fine. He couldn't pay the fine. The fine keeps on growing.
Right.
He owes that, and then maybe he even is put into prison because he can't pay.
He's put into jail. Very, very definitely. We have debtors' prison in this country for sure.
And how do you ever get out? I mean, once you're in this cycle, is there any way out?
It, you know, depends on where you are. There's been great legal advocacy happening across the country. A lot of legal aid societies, the ACLU, other advocate groups have been very active in trying to defend people to get them out. Barring that, a lot of people do languish in prison or languish in jail primarily. So a lot of times families are scraping together every dollar, cent, penny they can find to get people out. And, you know, we're talking often in criminal justice, we're talking about people who tend to not have a lot of resources. And so it's a huge burden on the family to try to scrape together enough money to get their loved one free.
Well, that raises the next quite obvious question, which is not only inequality, but race. I mean,
Right.
to what extent is this a particular problem for the poor and for Latinos and blacks?
I would say it's a huge problem. I mean, as you know, so black families have something like 1/8 the wealth of white families in this country. And so anything that deals with money and having to pay money is going to have a disproportionate impact on poor people. And in this country, race and poverty are very highly correlated, especially with black people and Latino people. And so there is no easy way to just kind of look up a national database and say to the extent to which this is true. But my research and the research of a few other scholars is showing that there is a massive element of race. And I would even argue that one of the reasons we are in this predicament where these policies were put in place is because of race, right? Minority communities have been over-policed and harshly policed for a long time. And so this is just another way of being very punitive to a certain element of society.
Punitive without it really being obvious. That is, it's all hidden.
Right.
I mean, the story that you're telling is a story where somebody's fined, or Mike says, my name is Mike rather than Michael, and it cycles into deeper and deeper debt and possibly jail, and there's no way out. But it's not as if it's a story that makes the headlines.
Right, and you know, I think that there's so many tragedies. You know, there's a couple of stories. I think there's one in South Carolina and one in Mississippi where people were taken to jail because of debt and ended up dying. They were either denied health care or nobody was paying attention to them, and so people are being subjected to the serious brutality of our criminal system, the jail and prison, on the basis of money, on the basis of owing money, and sometimes it's small amounts, you know, or it could be small amounts, hundreds of dollars, that many people could pay in this country, but to a lot that is an extreme hardship. So yes, people are getting sucked into the cycle of debt and they can't get out.
And what happens to public defenders? I mean, if I'm poor, and aren't I legally entitled to a public defender?
You are, but in a lot of places you have to pay for it. Either an upfront fee, so this is for people who are indigent, which means you have no money. So we're going to people who have no money and saying, give us money to defend yourself. So a lot of places it's either an upfront fee, sometimes it's called an application fee, sometimes it's called a reimbursement fee, and a lot of times it is unrefundable, it is mandatory, there's no discussion, there's no payment plan, and so obviously a lot of people can't pay, so what happens is if you're convicted, it gets attached to your sentence. So if you're then found guilty of whatever it is, and a lot of times it's something like, you know, sleeping on the sidewalk, okay, well, indigent defense, or something maybe worse than that, like maybe you stole something, or maybe you tagged something. You have no defense attorney, or you do, and then you get found guilty, then the cost of that person defending you is added to whatever fine and fee you owe.
Which just adds to the cycle of being caught in this Kafkaesque nightmare.
Right.
But are there instances where people are arrested, let's say for something like sleeping on the sidewalk, and they try to get a public defender, and they have to pay their jail. They've got to pay their public defender, and what happens? They can't do that. Then they languish in jail even more, which I suppose is that. I mean, supposing they're innocent. I mean, supposing they're actually haven't done what is being accused. They're accused of. They want a public defender to help them prove their innocence, and they still have to pay the public defender.
Still have to pay.
And they're found innocent, not guilty, but they still have to pay.
They still have to pay. In some places, varies across jurisdictions, but in some places you still have to pay.
Maybe I'm being naive, but I thought that there was a principle in American law, and even under the Constitution, it's called the Equal Protection Clause. It's called,
excessive fines. We have a little
yes.
amendment of that.
There is language in the Constitution that seems to prohibit what you are talking
There's
about.
not only language in the Constitution, there are a series of Supreme Court rulings saying that you can't, for example, keep somebody in prison or revoke their probation for willful non-payment. The problem is that we didn't define willful. And so it's up to judges to decide what it looks like when somebody's willfully not paying.
So what, and these judges who are deciding that somebody is willfully not paying, well, let's say, you're saying, they say, well, if he doesn't pay, he's willfully not paying.
Well,
I mean, even if he's indigent, if he doesn't pay, that's purposive and that's willful, and so the Constitution doesn't apply.
Well, what actually happens is judges in the courtroom will say, oh, I see you have nice tennis shoes. You could have paid. Or I see you have a tattoo. Who knows when you got the tattoo, but you had money. Or I see you have a manicure, right? Or you're wearing a nice jacket. That means that you're willfully not paying because you at some point had money. So judges, I've read a lot of opinions recently, and judges will say things like, well, the person could win the lottery someday. Or they should just be picking up cans and bottles and, not taking into account a person's lifestyle, if they have dependents, if they're taking care of, elderly family members or kids, or have a job, or have a 4-hour commute, which a lot of people do, et cetera, et cetera.
Karin, you're describing a really horror show for a lot of poor people, disproportionately Black and Latino. And a criminal justice system that is not only letting them down, but actually making it worse for them.
Yes, sucking them into it.
Yeah, it's kind of a vortex.
Yeah.
What's the answer? What do we do? I mean, if we care about justice, and let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that most people really would find this appalling if they knew what was going on, what do we do?
I think it actually starts, I'm going to go real macro on you.
Go macro.
Decriminalize. We do not need to have all these different types of behaviors which are perhaps unsanitary or unpleasant or unseemly, rarely actually a threat to public safety. We don't need to have those be crimes or offenses, right? There are other ways to control or to influence behavior in the social sphere. Here in Berkeley, we have those little guys on Segways. They're Berkeley ambassadors, and they go around and ask and answer people's questions and tell people to stand up or to not litter, right? There's other ways that we can influence behavior, especially for things like riding your bike on the sidewalk or sitting on your stoop drinking a beer in a paper bag, which happens a lot in urban areas, right? Because people don't have a lot of indoor space, so they're outside having recreation. So we don't need to criminalize all of these things. So that would be the first macro answer, is actually to eradicate a lot of these very low-level offenses as crimes in the first place. But on that topic, there's a move to actually take things from kind of the criminal world to the civil world, but that just means we're actually making more things subject to fines.
Now, when you say criminal to civil, some people are not going to know what civil means. But what you're saying is, instead of making it punitive and part of the where you can go to jail, you make it civil, that is a fine. That is, you have to pay a fine.
Yes.
But it still could end up in jail.
Exactly, because we have this separation between civil and criminal in our country. But what happens is people start in the civil world, they can't pay the fine, and because they can't pay the fine, they end up back in the criminal world, which is the world of custodial sanctions, meaning that's the world where the state can supervise you, can keep you where they want to keep you.
So it's not that really sharp a distinction as a matter of practice.
Yeah.
So your second point after decriminalizing was?
I don't know, what's my second point?
Well, I don't know. I thought you were saying something about making these things less, decriminalizing and also taking away some of the fines.
Yeah, decriminalize and I think make them less severe. And there's the way in Europe that they do it is with day fines. It's kind of one of my favorite topics to at least talk about, because in Europe, a lot of the offenses are dealt with fines. Germany is like leading the way. I think something like 80% of their offenses are dealt with fines. And a day fine essentially calculates based on the severity of the offense, like how bad the thing is that you did, and your daily income, some version of your daily income.
Oh, I see. That's
they literally multiply those two things together and come up with an amount of fine that is punitive to you and takes into account how bad the thing is that you did, and then you can actually pay it.
Well, that's an interesting question. Should the fine that somebody has to pay for doing something that is wrong vary with how wealthy somebody is or how much income that person has?
I like that idea.
Well, it makes an awful lot of sense.
I think I don't think we can directly transplant it from Europe to the U.S. for a variety of reasons. But I do think it's definitely worth exploring. I think we need a floor and a ceiling, right? So I think if you're indigent, you shouldn't be asked to pay money. By definition, you don't have money, so stop that. And at the same time, I don't think that we can tolerate culturally somebody having to pay like $1 million driving ticket just because they are worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay, so solution number one, go through, decriminalize, and also don't have fines for a lot of things that behavior can be modified simply by asking people or giving them the right incentives.
Right.
Number two, let's actually make the fine proportional to the offense, if something is an offense, and proportional to somebody's ability to pay.
Yes, and I think third, I would like to see just across the board amnesty for outstanding debt at this point, because a lot of people are suffering with tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. Actually, a group of advocacy groups did a study recently, or a survey recently, and found that people's family have spent or owe $13,000 on average when somebody leaves prison, or for somebody who's in prison. So families have this enormous budget.
And that debt is related to the criminal justice system.
Absolutely.
This is debt that was created by the fact that the person got involved in the criminal justice system, and it is larger than the particular fine involved. This is debt that accumulates.
And this is everything. And this is the thing that I think is really important to know, is that it can make sense to have a fine that is meant to punish. Totally, I think a lot of people understand that makes sense. The issue is when we get into fees, when we get into surcharges, when we get into restitution, which is a whole other bucket of worms. That's a weird metaphor, but we could talk about restitution separately. So from the perspective of the person, it's just this monolithic debt. From the perspective of the system, the court is just saying, well, you just owe us court costs. And probation is saying, well, you just owe us probation fees. And restitution is saying, well, you just owe us restitution. And the court is saying, oh, well, you just owe us a fine, right? So all these different agencies are involved, but the person is just seeing, I owe X number
and
of
getting
dollars.
more and more and more and more bills deeper and deeper into debt. Can you just take a moment to talk about restitution?
I can.
Because it's a bucket of worms.
It is a bucket of worms.
But talk about that.
Well, restitution is meant to restore the victim. So you do something bad to somebody, bodily harm, property harm. You're supposed to give them money back, right? Pay them, compensate them for the harm that you caused. I think ethically and morally and intuitively it makes a lot of sense, right? You graffitied my wall, pay to have it cleaned up. You broke my window, pay me back for the window. You punched me in the face, pay me for medical bills. Restitution, I think that makes sense, right? Just the idea. The issue is that a lot of times restitution is paid to a state fund, right? And so a person may have a victimless crime, such a, I don't know, whatever a person's definition of victimless crime is, they still have to pay restitution to this general fund that manages it, and often can then compensate other victims. But it kind of raises this question about the point of restitution, right? Is it to restore a victim, or is it just kind of to pay to restore victims that you had nothing to do with?
Well, supposing again a crime that is, I'm smoking marijuana.
Right.
All right, and there are states that don't like that, there are jurisdictions that don't like that, and that's a crime.
Yes.
And I have to pay restitution, but there's nobody who's particularly, hurt by that.
Right.
But it's called restitution, but it actually goes to a state.
It goes to a state fund. Sometimes it can go to a general fund, it goes to a special restitution fund, and in some places the restitution goes to, like, the police department. You're paying them restitution because they had to deal with you.
Because they had to deal with it.
Yes.
And that's a hardship.
It is.
So all of these things are going on, and they're piling on. We've talked about two ways of dealing with it, in terms of decriminalizing and getting rid of the small fines, and also making sure that the fines are proportional. And how about returning to the basic idea of criminal justice, which is that people are protected from the police and from jail. I mean, that the criminal justice system is designed to protect us,
Right.
not to be a liability
Right.
to us.
And this is something that I'm, working on in my own work right now, is thinking about how we've shifted from punishments to something to kind of restore some flaw, fix some flaw in the so-called offender. That somebody has done something bad, then the purpose is to punish them or incapacitate them or just do something to them. What we've done is actually crossed over some line where the point is to benefit, for the state to benefit, right? Like, it's not to do something to you, it's to get something for us.
Yeah,
and I think that's a real philosophical shift that we've made.
Yeah, and it becomes, I mean, these people who are arrested, sometimes for very minor charges, become profit centers.
Yes.
They become ways of generating revenue for the municipality
Absolutely.
or for the county or for the state.
Yes.
And how do we get rid of that? I mean, we just say the states pass laws that they will not any longer be profit centers. Or
some states are chipping away at this and saying, it's interesting because some states mandate that all of these things go to the general fund. Some states mandate that they cannot go to the general fund, that they go straight to the courthouse or they go straight to the sheriffs, or some kind of divvy them up. Iowa is interesting because their prosecutors, the county attorneys, get some cut of the amount of debt that they collect. And so you can imagine there's all types of incentives, problematic, in that various ways, because you want things to be taken care of, but at the same time, if you're saying literally you get to keep some of the money you collect, you can see how that might thwart some other justice goals.
Well, if prosecutors get a cut of how much money they collect, and if police indirectly get a cut of how much money they collect, I mean, well, those are bizarre incentives.
Yes.
I mean, maybe you just want the money that's collected to go into the general fund of the state.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there could be perverse incentives there too.
There could be. That's the thing. There really could be.
But at least you're not creating an incentive on the actor, the criminal justice actor, the prosecutor, the police, to
and judges,
generate.
there's places that have passed statutes explicitly to increase the salary of judges. Right? The judges didn't pass it, but this is the legislators' solution for how to increase the salary. It's probably quite well deserved. The question is, where do you get that money from? And I think it comes to taxes. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about that. But
You're allowed to talk about anything.
You have to talk about it.
On this program, we talk about taxes. We talk about anything. But are there places in this country where judges' salaries are paid for in part by revenue streams coming from mostly poor defendants and people who get deeper and deeper into the kind of holes we've been talking about?
Yes, and I don't think that it's as direct as I got $5 in fine, I just got $5 of my salary. It's not quite like that, but there's certainly a ton of institutional incentives in place where the pressure is on the court to generate revenue, and part of that revenue, even if it goes to the general fund, then the state still knows where the money came from. So when it's time to then give out the money to the court system, they say, oh, well, court X brought us this much money. They should probably get this much money back, right? So it may not be exactly quid pro quo, right? Like the state says you collect it, you get to keep it. It may not be that, but I think that the incentives are in place that we are getting money for the criminal justice system from the absolutely wrong places.
So we've talked about what the problem, what should be done. The final question I have for you, and I don't want to keep you too long, is how do you get the political will to make these changes? I mean, I find it appalling. I mean, I knew it was bad, but actually sitting here talking to you and hearing the whole story makes frankly my blood boil a little bit. So
Yeah.
how do we get a lot of other people to the point where their blood is boiling and they're putting pressure on legislators and on county and on the local officials to change it?
I think it's really important to get these stories out. I think that some of the parts of the media are doing really good work in this space, and I think that like I mentioned before, there's some advocacy groups that are doing wonderful work across the country, and I think we need to get the stories out. And I think that people also need to speak up, because this is not just happening to a small slice of the society. The issue is that some of us can afford to pay things, right? So if you get a traffic ticket and you are an upper middle class person, like, it's a real big pain in the butt. I do not feel like spending $500 on this, but I can, and I can still survive and still buy clothes and food and take care of my kids. So I think even if you can afford it, it's still an issue, right? You need to be thinking about the fairness. Obviously, it can be irritating, but think about the fairness. Like, what are you paying for with all of these surcharges? And is that how you want to pay for it? Maybe it is, right? Maybe you'd much rather pay for it in these secret little $2 or $5 as penalty assessments than to have your taxes go up.
But the problem, as you have suggested, is that if this is mostly a burden borne by the poor, disproportionately Black and Latino, then the vast middle class and a lot of working people and a lot of white people can just say, well, that's their problem, it's not my problem. So how do you make it, how do you enable people to see that it's all of our problem?
It's all of our problem because we're all paying for it, right? You may think it's just their problem, but when it comes time to actually try to collect all of that debt, your tax dollars are being spent to harass, fine, track that person on those payments. So if we put somebody in jail, for example, in New York City, I think it costs something like $400-ish to keep somebody in jail for a day. So if somebody owes $150 and you put them in jail because they didn't pay $150, that math,
I can
right,
get that math.
quickly, right,
I can get that
does
math.
not quite add up. And so if we start to think about the cost of supporting the system, our money is not being used well. Our money is being used to keep this churn of people who are being kind of debilitated by this debt, and we're not getting anything for it. It's not like we're getting public safety, because a lot of people are afraid to then interact with the government or the law enforcement. It's not like we're getting money, because a lot of people can't afford it. In fact, we're spending money. And it's not like we're getting efficiency in government, because the government now needs to explode in size and explode in offices to the bureaucracy just to maintain the system.
Karin Martin, you, by even talking about your research and what you've discovered, are educating people out there, and just keep going.
Okay.
Now, do you understand why she's so special, and she's my best graduate student, and why she's no longer a graduate student?
I'm professing.
You're now a professor.
I am.
Professing. Thank you, Karin.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.